Newcastle have got to find a way to persuade Alexander Isak to stay for at least another year, to start playing in a World Cup year. If they are to bid again, they're bidding against themselves. But Chelsea are less inclined if there's no permanence to the deal.
Hello, I'm Susan Owens and welcome to The Window, talkSPORT's daily video transfer update and your go-to guide to all of the biggest football moves. Coming up, we'll be getting the latest on the Isak saga, Kobbie Mainoo's potential departure from Man United, and what on earth is going to happen to Nicholas Jackson. Joining me today is talkSPORT's transfer correspondent, Ben Jacobs. We are into the final days of this transfer window, and I feel like it's this period of time that in true football fashion it is squeaky bum time deals. Kind of how it feels. So in the story that has dominated the transfer window, I guess we'll get this one out of the way. The latest we've heard is that the Newcastle directors have visited Alexander Isak's house yesterday ahead of the Liverpool game, so before everything kicked off. They're obviously still a little bit unsure about his future, but with less than a week left, how do you actually see this saga ending with Isak?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because all summer it's been about Alexander Isak stay or go, and now we're heading into the final days and the clarity is only going to come now. And I think from Newcastle's point of view, they believe that it would be untenable to keep Alexander Isak unless he signs a new deal. That wouldn't necessarily have to be today, tomorrow, but certainly very soon after the window shuts if he stays. And part of the talks with Alexander Isak and part of the delay from the Newcastle side has been to see whether he might be prepared to reintegrate. And it's very much at the moment between Newcastle and Isak. Liverpool have backed off. They bid once, 110 million. They don't perceive that bid to be a so-called low ball, even though some Newcastle sources have that opinion, because it was 110 million fixed and it's a British transfer record in that ballpark or category of fee. And if Liverpool are to return, I'm not told it will be 150 million or even necessarily 130 million. I think Liverpool made it clear at the beginning of the window their number is in and around 120 million, and if they bid again they expect the deal to be done on those kind of terms. So Newcastle naturally are using their ownership to try and speak directly with Isak, see if reintegration is possible, and then if it isn't and they can get in a replacement or two, Liverpool feel there might be a window of opportunity late in the window. And actually feel like if Liverpool are given encouragement, the club to club then will not be a problem. It's very much just about, will the door be opened? If it is, then I think everyone might be on the same page. If it isn't, then Newcastle have got to find a way to persuade Alexander Isak to stay for at least another year, to start playing in a World Cup year. And then in likelihood, if there was to be a new deal at the other extreme, it would be on the premise that he could still leave in a year's time. So this saga isn't over. Liverpool haven't given up, and we should be in for an exciting few final days of the window, because this deal might go down to the very wire.
Do you think there's a chance that Liverpool will up the deal? You know, I know a lot of people have said, like, oh, it was an insulting deal, but it is a record. But do you think there's any way that they'll buckle for Isak and go higher?
Not necessarily, because Liverpool want to be disciplined in the market, and they're aware that if they are to bid again, they're bidding against themselves. There's no other suitor, and if they are to bid again, it will be because there's encouragement, which means that Newcastle want to engage. In other words, they've decided that Alexander Isak should be sold, and it's in the best interest of all parties. So in a scenario where Liverpool come back to the table, I think they'll feel they've got a lot of power and have the ascendancy, because Newcastle, if they are to decide Isak is better served moving to Anfield, will then want this resolved as well. And you can imagine it won't suit any parties if Newcastle tell Isak he can leave, if Newcastle tell Liverpool we invite another bid, Liverpool make another bid, and then Newcastle United say, no, we're holding out for 150 million. Liverpool would walk away, and ultimately no clarity, no resolution, and actually probably more acrimony on all sides as well. So I think Liverpool want to be disciplined. They also know that if they inflate the market further in future, that could impact other deals. I sense this will be exactly like Florian Wirtz, where for the early part of the summer, we were told if Bayern were in the race, it was 150 million euros. When Liverpool entered the race, we were told it was 150 million euros. euros, but in the end they did that deal a lot closer to 130 million euros. And if you switch the euros to pounds, then maybe it's going to follow a similar path. That Liverpool's expectation will be 120 million. Newcastle may suddenly say 150 million, but Liverpool have never directly been quoted that number. More likely, the Newcastle counter will be 130 million. And then in likelihood, if this progresses, they'll end up meeting halfway. But that's what we need to wait for, because it's the two extremes. The middle ground was always Isak could stay, not sign a new deal, 3 years left on his contract, Champions League football, well paid. And I think Newcastle United, until about April, just before the season ended, thought we've got 2 out of the 3 options here. We keep him as is, or we extend him. So 66% chance that he stays. Then, when the summer began and Isak decided he was not going to train or go on their pre-season tour, that middle ground option that gave Newcastle a bit more control was removed. And now I'm told again, it's sale or new deal. And that's what makes this so intriguing, because like with Morgan Gibbs-White, it could go from almost leaving to suddenly extending, or it could go from trying to get him to extend in the current days to a realization that sale is the only option. And that's when I think Liverpool might just get their price.
On to another team. We are hearing this morning that West Ham are in advanced talks over a deal to sign the midfielder Magasa for £14.7 million. Do you know the latest on this deal?
Yeah, it's around 20 million euros with a few add-ons on top, and talks are advanced. We know that West Ham have been absolutely desperate to add not just one but multiple midfielders, so they won't be done as far as I'm aware. Graham Potter looking for legs in the centre of the park. He wants a 6 and an 8 as well. And the clubs are now, at the time we're recording, in advanced conversations. We might get a breakthrough today, but certainly within the next 24 or 48 hours. This is not one I expect to drag on to the final days of the window. I think West Ham feel that this deal can be agreed in principle by the middle part of the week. And then from there, they'll still be looking for another midfielder to come in, and maybe even a wide attacker as well.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. Definitely one to keep an eye out on. And over at Chelsea, it seems they've agreed a deal to loan striker Nicholas Jackson to Bayern Munich. Would you be surprised to see him go in a deal? And where has Aston Villa gone in this whole thing?
Yeah, I don't think we're quite agreed yet, although it could, of course, move very quickly. So Chelsea's priority is for the outgoings of both Nico Jackson and Christopher Nkunku. If they are to engage with Bayern, Bayern's perspective is they want a loan. Chelsea are pushing in that structure for a loan with an obligation. And I think it will be easier for a loan formula for a club outside of the Premier League. So Aston Villa really like Nico Jackson. Unai Emery had him at Villarreal. The advantage of Jackson is that he can lead the line, compete with Evan Gessard and Ollie Watkins, but in addition to that, go out on the wide left. And that is where he played quite effectively as well at times for Villarreal. So Unai Emery appreciates the versatility, but Chelsea are less inclined, if there's no permanence to the deal or the formula is more preferable to the buyer than the seller, to just go and strengthen a Premier League rival. So for Newcastle and Aston Villa, I think it would either have to be a heavy loan fee and a guaranteed obligation, so nothing conditional, or a permanent transfer. But maybe Bayern Munich will be able to get a slightly more preferable structure simply because Chelsea are not directly strengthening a Premier League rival. So yes, Bayern are in talks for Nico Jackson, and the player's already agreed terms, so he'd be prepared to make that move, but it's not to say that he wouldn't also want to stay in the Premier League as well. And then with Christopher Nkunku, Leipzig is quite an interesting one. They're not the only club, but if they get that deal done, then it might unlock Xavi Simons to Chelsea. And Alejandro Garnacho is still expected to happen between now and the end of the window. So Chelsea's first priority is outgoings, and there'll be several of them. And then maybe towards the middle or even right up to the final hours or minutes of the deadline, we'll start to see that formalisation as Chelsea try and get both Xavi Simons and Alejandro Garnacho over the line.
Yeah, so with loans and all that kind of aspect of it, so obviously a lot of the main priority would be to get people out and sold so that you can then have that money to spend on other players. But when it comes to loans, is that a good enough transfer or a good enough loan fee, to kind of help the team to look for other players? Like, is that a good enough? Is it a lot lower?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's sort of different aspects at play here. So one is outgoings because certain players are just surplus to requirements, and in the case of Ben Chilwell, Raheem Sterling have got high wages. Two is PSR and Chelsea Field compliance. That's the domestic financial rules.
Yeah.
And then three is this push to satisfy UEFA. You may remember a few months ago, Chelsea made a settlement with UEFA, and one of the terms is that their A-list squad has to have a so-called positive balance. In other words, as you align your finances, if Chelsea are to register new signings for the Champions League in September as A-list players, they need to make sure that UEFA are satisfied. Otherwise, they'll only be able to register players that were in the A-list for last season's UEFA Conference League. And that's the sort of challenge. And I don't think it's a case of Chelsea panicking, because either way, they will satisfy UEFA. But I think it's the fact that if they're to both satisfy UEFA and spend more money on Alejandro Garnacho and Xavi Simons, that's where the outgoings are necessary. If they only did one of Garnacho or Xavi Simons or zero, then I think they feel they will be UEFA compliant anyway. But if they're to spend potentially as high as £50 million on Garnacho and maybe a fee of in excess of £55 million on Xavi Simons, that is a late window spend of close to another 100 million. So this is where the outgoings, particularly of Nico Jackson and also Christopher Nkunku, are important. If it's not a conditional obligation, in other words, it starts as an option and becomes triggered as an obligation depending on certain criteria. If it's a straight obligation, then from Chelsea's point of view, they can budget and bank for that fee because they're going to get it at the end of the season, and they can choose to either put it on this current financial year or the next one, and that's the flexibility of the structure. So Chelsea feel fine with their finances, but again, if they're to spend another 100 million, these outgoings, particularly for Nico Jackson and Christopher Nkunku, are important. And then they have to think about just reducing their wage bill, which is over a longer period of time, and the squad chemistry as well. So the last thing Chelsea want to do is add Garnacho and Siemens and then be in a situation where Nico Jackson and Christopher Nkunku are still both there, because that's two players through the centre in the Xavi Simons position. So Enzo Maresca will be also conscious that if they're to add two more, the squad size basically stays the same. And that's why it's kind of a case of 2 in, 2 out, if at all possible, between now and the end of the window.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Well, let's head over to Manchester United now, because in surprising news for the fans, I would imagine, England midfielder Kobbie Mainoo will consider leaving Man United in the final week of the window if there's a suitable offer. Do we know what kind of, which clubs are interested in him? And is this a smart move for Kobbie Mainoo?
Yeah, it's an evolving situation. So this was broken by our chief football correspondent, Alex Crook, and Kobbie Mainoo is open to offers in the final days of the window. Of course, there's an element of leverage and games here because you're open to offers. If he stays at Manchester United, the window shuts. You've suddenly got the ability to say, I could have left, I stayed, maybe still start or resume the contract renewal talks. And at the moment, I would say Mainoo's future is uncertain because even if he is open to offers, there's nothing concrete yet. But I think there's a message out to the market now that if you want Kobbie Mainoo, there's a chance, at least on the player side, he might engage. And that's a bit of a U-turn from 2-3 months ago, where Mainoo was happy at Manchester United. He wanted to sign a new deal at Manchester United. And of course, Manchester United still want him to stay. And I can tell you that the first preference for Kobbie Mainoo and Manchester United is to make it work. Mainoo wants to play. He loves Manchester United. He wants a new deal. But ultimately, it's contingent on him being deemed to be a fit in Ruben Amorim's system and playing regularly. And if he feels like in this system, his chances are going to be diminished, then in a World Cup year, Mainoo has had to and may have to continue to reconsider. In terms of clubs, we only really know the historical ones. Newcastle United and also Chelsea have both got appreciation for Kobbie Mainoo, but Newcastle United's midfield is well stocked at the moment. And in addition to that, Chelsea have obviously made their own reinforcements in the centre of the park. So there doesn't really feel like a squad fit now with either of those two clubs. Bayern Munich have looked at Mainoo in the past, but all of this is historical. So Mainoo doesn't have any concrete options yet, but his future is still one to watch in the final days of the window because the market is now aware that Mainoo may consider a move away. And as a consequence, we should keep a very close eye on the Kobbie Mainoo situation.
is it common to see a player go up for grabs so late in the window?
Not necessarily common, but there's late window opportunism. You've got a few players out there. Dusan Vlahovic, Juventus are offering him around. Newcastle United are one of the clubs, but it doesn't look like they're going to proceed. You naturally have people trying their luck with some sort of big names, some untouchables, particularly if they free up a bit of funds, which is where Chelsea, before necessarily moving forwards with Xavi Simons, were kind of asking about Morgan Rogers, just to see whether or not there's any late window urgency or need for Aston Villa to sell. You've got a player like Gigi Donnarumma, who would have thought at the beginning of the summer that he might stay, and then Lucas Chevalier came into PSG, and now it looks like there's a real market opportunity there because Donnarumma's got 1 year left on his contract, and PSG's price has dropped from about 50 million euros to somewhere closer to 30 or 35 million, and all of that means a team that wouldn't have wanted to move earlier in the window because of price or the player putting the brakes on it suddenly says, okay, we've got a green light now from all sides. And I think this is where we're at. So, for example, you have Saudi Arabia and Al Ittihad that are at least wondering if Bruno Fernandes might change his mind. I think Manchester United haven't had an approach and are calm about the situation. You might get some late window movement on Casemiro still, again from Saudi Arabia, and the same applies for Kobbie Mainoo too. So if the market suddenly feels like Manchester United need a midfielder or need outgoings, and they can't resolve at the moment anyway Garnacho, Sancho, that might come a bit later in the window, you start to wonder as a potential buyer, should we try our luck here? Is the club or the player position going to change? And you do get a bit of a shifting of dynamic as all parties kind of drop the games and show their true hand in the final days of the window. And this is why we often get some surprise transfers late in a transfer window. And this is also why I think we're going to have a very exciting end to the window. So stay tuned to talkSPORT for all the latest.
Absolutely. It feels like a long time since we've had this exciting of a transfer window. But Ben, thank you so much for joining me. I do feel more informed now. So thank you very much.
Phone going every 2 minutes, and it's probably the case that every time you think you've got a hold on something, there's a new bid, there's new drama. We'll definitely get some clarity on Alexander Isak. So like I say, stay tuned.
Remember, the window will be back tomorrow to keep you up to date with the latest rumours and done deals as the end of the transfer window approaches. The window is in association with our own bookie, talkSPORT Bet. So download the app or head to talksportbet.com if you want to get involved. 18 plus, T's and C's apply, begambleaware.org.